Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the HR Revolution or Evolution. It's the revolution of HR for the evolution of business. And we do this through conversations with thought leaders and experts in the field, people that have done it before and tried to just take a step or walk a mile in their moccasins so we can share best practices, learn from those experiences, and hopefully improve our outcomes and our results in our role in HR, personnel, people, whatever we're calling it today. So with me today, I have Chris Darone, my co-host, and I would like to introduce him now.
Thank you, Kevin. Everybody, it's great to be back for another episode of the HR Revolution. With us today is Tarik Bazzy. He's an HR professional that combines business acumen, data analytics, and business intelligence, and expertise in leading compensation, benefits, talent management, and employee engagement. Tarik has spent the bulk of his career with Ally Financial Systems, but he is now with DT Midstream. On behalf of Kevin and myself, we want to thank you, Tarik, for taking time to join us today and welcome you to the show.
Thank you, man. That was quite the intro. I gotta take you with me more places.
You got it.
Yeah, if you ever need a hype man, Chris is your guy. You know, that's what he goes right. for. That's how he gets paid. You know, just paid for the hype.
That's
well,
great.
I see the Michigan, the big yellow M that you strategically placed before we got on this call. So I have to ask, are you a Michigan or a Michigan State fan? Because you attended both. And which stadium is actually bigger?
Well, there's no doubt Michigan's a bigger and better stadium, bigger and better basketball and football programs. But I did my undergrad at U of M Dearborn, and I always like to say your alliances should stick with your undergrad, right? You spent more time there, hopefully. I absolutely enjoyed my time at MSU. It was an awesome place and an excellent education that I got from there. But on game days, my blood bleeds maize and blue.
Awesome. Tarik, tell us a little bit about yourself. Let's say you're driving into work. What are you listening to? You got a podcast on, you got some music that you like, what's the typical drive into work type of radio that you're listening to?
Yeah, so I'm a big podcast person. So Work Life by Adam Grant's kind of one of my favorite ones. And I kind of just discovered that. So getting caught up on some of the old seasons. Cool. Angela Duckworth has a great podcast as well that I like to listen to. So I try to just dabble, and it's my one time of hey, how do I pick up tidbits for myself along the way. So my drive is my learning time.
There you go. Awesome.
I love that. It's kind of the same experience that I think a lot of people took during the pandemic, and some took the opportunity to take that big time out to reevaluate and elevate themselves. And I think started to seek out podcasts and seek out more information, so they can develop. And hence why we started this show and why this became a quick passion project for Chris, myself, and Bobby, because there's a lot of information out there. What is one song, if you had to listen to the rest of your life on repeat, what song would you pick, Tarik?
Oh, if I'm listening to a song on repeat, oh man, I'm going to get absolutely crushed for this by the friends and family here. But one of my favorite jams of all time is Unwritten by Natasha Bedingfield.
Okay.
And I know I'm gonna get crushed for that one by everyone, but hey, that's
it's all right.
The go-to.
Before we kind of get into the HR tidbits of advice that we hopefully can pull from you today from this conversation, what is your favorite movie of all time?
Oh, Gladiator.
Nice
Gladiator
choice.
fan.
All right.
No hesitation there.
No
either.
hesitation.
Yeah.
Right out of the
gate. Yeah.
Ask him his song. It gets a little weird.
I'm dated in my music. Everything goes back to like 2003 and 4.
Okay.
So.
I love it. That's great.
I'm going to jump right in here and kind of start where it all started for Tarik. I think kind of going back and just doing our history on you, it looked like you got your real start in HR and with the full blown experience by really getting your hands dirty, in that internship program. And that's really what I think we've seen more organizations, especially in the trades, start more and more of these internship programs, identifying that they're going to have to create their own labor pool. that it's not going to create itself today. How important was that in your development, your internship? And do you see that as the future of workforce planning and development for sustainable business models?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of like, how do you change what your workforce looks like over a course of 5 or 10 years? An internship program is, in my mind, one of the greatest ways that you can do that. It's that pipeline of, fresh new talent and ideas, but it's also going to test your ability to cultivate them, to help them learn and grow. And so you really kind of get to see how good you are as an organization to not only bring people in, but where are they leaving the organization as well, right? So are you able to take them all the way up from entry-level analysts into managers and directors and senior directors over time? Or, are you using them for this kind of cheap labor, if you will, and it's a churn and burn and it's replenished. So there's a lot of different goals that internship programs can solve for. But I absolutely think it's one of the best ways, especially now that we look at D&I goals for a lot of companies. If you get it right up front, it fixes a lot of things on the back end. Mm-hmm. So I think it's one of those huge keys to success.
Yeah, because we've seen the adverse, right? And if there is a shortage of talent and you don't have the right people in the right seats, then it causes disruptions within the business and stalled growth. And it's awesome to hear you say is like, what is the overall goal? What is the intention behind the program? Because to your point, it is a learning opportunity. I love how you said that. I've never even thought about it like that before. So thank you for that added insight.
Yeah.
There.
And like, if you're managing an internship program itself, right? Like, you're always going to be fighting that battle of this is what we want. And then people in the business saying like, no, I want X, Y, or Z, just because, and so you start getting some interns and they start getting really good. Now people in the org start looking around like, okay, I need one of those, right? I don't want to be left out. And so one of the things that we would do really was, well, what's your ability to hire after the fact? And if you didn't have that ability, that was really where we started to make some pushback on, like, can you have an intern? And so those were some tough conversations, but some fun ones, where you start to say, okay, hey, you want to hire 4, but you want 16, right? Like, those aren't great odds. Let's think about like the impact to our program and our reputation when we get back on campus. That'll be a huge thing that we got to monitor and manage as well. So, I think best practice I've always read was, you want an internship program probably somewhere around 1% of your total org size. And then you're trying to find a balance with, like a 2-for-1, right? So 2 interns for 1 hire type of deal. And that one might turn into 1.5 or 2 and vice versa. So many different factors on org size and design and goals that would kind of go into that decision. But those were all things that we put into the pipeline when we were doing it at Ally.
Very cool.
That's great. I think you brought up a couple of really good points there, Tarik, and, having that goal, in mind and understanding that goal. I think as an HR practitioner, it's your job to help the business understand what that goal really is versus cheap labor. Because I think the business usually looks at it just, hey, I can get some warm bodies and some cheap labor and we can get some work done. So tell me, you mentioned there were some, interesting conversations, as the HR professional, how did you go about working with those business leaders or business managers to help them understand, hey, here's the ultimate goal and what we're getting from this program versus just cheap labor and warm bodies? So tell me a little bit about those conversations.
Yeah, so what I noticed was anytime the message, we're playing that like telephone game, right? Of, hey, go tell your client group X, Y, Z. There was always this like tension then between you as a program and the folks in the business. And so one of the things that we did to kind of hedge that was we put together a team of people throughout the business to be kind of this, we called it the early talent program. So we're now taking people from the business that will be those direct liaisons to those groups. And so it's no longer, a message passed down. It's someone in their own group saying, hey, we were chatting about this, right? This is a concern. We're worried about, hiring interns because we won't have the ability to bring them back. We're worried about their overall experience. We want them to have a successful and meaty internship, right? If we've got this many interns, like, yeah, the more work to go around, the more meaty the work tends to be. And so just making sure we don't spread ourselves too thin. And when you approach it from that position of caring, I think that's really a huge difference. And now kind of here at DT Midstream, we're brand new off a spinoff. And this will be kind of the first summer that I'm with a company where we don't have an internship program. So that's something that we've absolutely highlighted, like, hey, let's get this thing off the ground for the future. And but obviously, company size from 8,000 at Ally down to 300 here at DT Midstream, right? It'll look and feel a lot different.
Sure.
So we're kind of going through all those stripes again right now.
Yeah, and obviously this brings up you brought up size and how obviously you were taking more of a data-driven approach in your time at Ally, and it's just assumed, I think, in most cases in businesses, the idea that data needs to be perfect, right, before we can do anything with it. But just the size difference, right? I'm a small, medium-sized business. I'm 300 employees, like you mentioned. How valuable is data still to you in your role at such a smaller organization, and how do you utilize it?
Yeah, so my first manager that I had in HR, his name was Fred Cawley. Absolutely one of the best people I've ever come across in HR.
Wow.
And he always had like these one-liners and sayings that really stuck with me. And it was, data will tell you what you want to see. And, I could look at the same data that Chris does and Kevin does, and we can come up with 3 different stories on how to tell that data and how to tell that story, right? So like being able to check yourself on what the real story is. And like Chris might say, like, hey, I'm seeing attrition rise in these areas. And I'm saying, well, I'm not really seeing bad attrition, like I'm seeing low performer attrition, right? So maybe we're more okay with that. And so it's just a matter of, what are you going to look at and how do you check yourself against going down a path, right, that data might lead you to, and you get too far down and you almost feel committed to it at that point. So I think that's one of the scary things about data is there's 1,000 different messages we can tell with it, and being really clear about what it means is, I think, the toughest part about it.
Yeah.
So small organization. One of the things we'll look at is, in my role today with compensation is, how do we sit to market, right? So do you get overly excited about one job with one person in it that it might be a little above or below our market medians? Like, no, absolutely not, right? Like you got to take it in context, and you're able to actually better evaluate kind of the expertise within the organization. When you start to, when you've got smaller numbers, right, you can say, well, hey, we've got all these experts, right? We've got all these different specialties. It makes sense that we might be shifted one way or another. So it's different. And maybe one of the best things I've learned about like data in general and putting it out in front of like HR leaders and business leaders is, I feel like a lot of people feel comfortable with more data, right? Like, give me all the columns I can have, right? But one of the things I would always push back on is, how does this data element like help you make a decision, right?
Yeah.
You don't need performance from 2 and 3 years ago to make a decision on a BPR adjustment for this year.
Yeah.
Right. So those are the types of things that I think you got to get right up front, and on the back end, that storytelling piece is really, really key, and how you go about it and how you challenge yourself on it. Like, don't just jump in and say like, this is the story, right? Like you got to have that work buddy or that thought partner where you're going to say, this is what I'm seeing. Like, are you seeing it the same way?
I like that. And asking the right business questions, I think, is always important of the data, because how does that relate to the business? We might be having attrition, but what does that mean? And is that a priority? I think that's really I see data more as helping us set the priorities, right? When we can understand what the return on investment is, that helps me to understand, well, this gap is more important than that gap, or this issue is more important than that issue. So I appreciate you sharing that additional insights there on how you're using still data in a smaller institution or organization just to help guide you, almost like a compass, to pick up on those breadcrumbs and find where you can always add value. So thank you.
Tarik, I got a question for you, and maybe the compensation background that you have will be good just for our listeners to understand. So, the Great Resignation, the war for talent, we're in the middle of it, right? We've seen that companies are throwing money, sign-on bonuses, the kitchen sink, you name it, at potential candidates to get them to come. It's just so hard to find talent. With your background, what are you seeing? And then what would you say, organizations can do, small, medium business size like your own, or even larger organizations? What's that sweet spot, or what should organizations be doing? Because obviously throwing money isn't the answer, 100% of the time. So what's out there, from a enticing way to get candidates, interested in your organization to come work for you?
Yeah. So, one thing that in comp that you tend to see is the action reason codes when people leave, right? And you're trying to dive into that. You're trying to dive into engagement data, and you're trying to just get ahead of like where the market's moving before maybe some of that new data comes out. And so there's all these kind of different leading indicators that you could look at that would tell you things. But what I would kind of really look at were those exit interviews, right? And I try to like figure out, okay, well, where are people moving to? Are they moving from analyst to analyst? Are they moving from analyst to senior analyst? Like, are they title hopping, or are they experience hopping? Like, what is it? And then how do we kind of evaluate ourselves accordingly, right? And sometimes you say, hey, like, it is what it is, right? It was a numbers game. There was a funnel, and we knew we were going to lose some folks. Things like that happen, but it's at least going to be by design, and it should kind of follow some strict, like not strict rules, but some I guess vague rules, right? So that's one thing. And whenever I've had that conversation with like friends that were thinking about a new experience or a new job, the conversation was never about money for us. And I know there was a Yahoo study that just came out that said, this is the amount of money everyone needs to be happy in every state, right? There are 1,000 factors. Like, are you
whose definition of happiness
married,
is
kid, have a car, like, where do you want to live? Like, so many different factors that like number, like, take it with a grain of salt, right? Like, if you're above or below that number, it doesn't mean anything. And what the engagement surveys will teach you is money is not equal happiness, right? And so there's actually a lot of like engagement data around, the answer is always, we want more, right? So like, you don't actually get anything good out of asking, how satisfied are you with our compensation and benefits type of question. And so our conversations as, friends and mentor to mentee was always, what is the experience you're going to get, and how is that going to benefit you long term, right? So if you can't answer that question, if you're rotating just for the sake of rotating, like, yeah, that's cool, but it's got to have a purpose, right? So in kind of my own career, right, I started out in compensation, and then I think because I had a finance undergrad and an MBA, and they put me in comp to start, and I did pretty well in it. They thought I might never leave comp, right? But for me, that was my first job and opportunity out of HR, and I wanted to see what else was out there, right? So being brave enough to have that conversation with someone that is a decision maker ahead of you is, I think, a huge piece of the puzzle. I think all too often we keep it to ourselves, and we assume that people should know, or we've touched on it before, but make your intentions known. And if they can't give you honest feedback about, hey, you're here today and this is what you got to do to get to this spot, that's a different conversation. But I've always experienced people to be pretty transparent and honest about, hey, Tarik, this is where I see you. I think you are doing a really good job at raising your hand and saying, hey, there's a problem. We want you to get to, hey, there was a problem and we took A, B, C steps to correct it and now fill us in, right? Like that's taking the next step. And so especially for early talent, like understand like the antidotes, right? Of like within your organization, how do you get from point A to point B? I think that's really key.
Yeah.
And so for me, like going from comp to talent management was a really cool thing. And then
I got a question for you. I want to jump in right there, because seemingly, right, we keep trying to break up HR into these like subcategories, right?
Yes.
Talent management and compensation benefit strategy. Like to me, right, that would be one bucket because they all play on the same levers and the same emotional responses and things like that. Do you see that very similarly? Like compensation and benefits are just simply levers on how to get that emotional response from your employees to keep them fully engaged and immersed within the work in the business?
No, I really see compensation benefits as the price of admission, right? So that's what, like, if you're not getting that part right, like that is absolutely going to be the topic of conversation. And but once you get that piece right, it becomes all about, are you doing meaningful work? Do you engage with your manager, right? Like, do you have a voice? Like having a voice in the workplace is a huge thing. So I think all that kind of goes into it. And so for me, when I was finally evaluating, like being part of that Great Resignation, like, is this something that I want to do? Yes, you know, did I make more money kind of going from point A to point B? Yes, but like, it wasn't about the dollars. It really was about, hey, I've done the rotations. I want to get back to compensation now. And so this opportunity came up, and very similar to my decision to go to Ally, it's small enough where you get to put your hands on a lot of things, and you're not kind of a number in the wheel, right? So I think the bigger the company, it can sometimes be a really great experience to learn these really robust processes and these mature processes. But when you're in kind of these smaller organizations, you get the ability to have these broader experiences just because you don't have the luxury of like the higher headcount, right? So that was always something.
I think what you're describing is everybody's just looking to collect like Pokemon cards or baseball cards. They're trying to collect intellectual capital, right? And so therefore they're more desirable on the open workforce. I mean, so we're not, and I think some people came to that realization during the pandemic is, hey, my skills and my talents are valuable, right? Not everybody has these. How can I go cash that in, whether it's starting my own business, starting on my own consultancy, becoming a leadership development program, whatever it might be. We saw like all these spokes off of that initial spindle, if you will. So one of the things that you mentioned is the process and getting people to attract or feel more ownership of the process or the business. And you've actually specialized in process improvement, right? And we're talking about changing the ways that we're doing work today. And you already had some of that experience with overseeing 250 employees in 10 states, both in offices, but also remotely. How did that help prepare you for what people were still learning during the pandemic? So you were playing less telephone and more communicating effectively across that makeup.
Yeah, and honestly, I think for me, it doesn't really start with that HRBP role. It really was kind of the talent management role of like, hey, we got to communicate broadly to a large number of people. And the worst thing you can do is stay quiet, right? So when you don't give information, people kind of fill in the gaps. And when you give bad information, they spin that story and it kind of gets out of control. So, you know, being really clear cut about what you're trying to tell and why. I feel like the and why part is oftentimes missing from messages, right? So, you know, a quick example is we were evaluating how often to do our engagement survey. And we were thinking quarterly would be the right cadence. So out of nowhere, hey, we're going to do this thing once a year. Wow. And I'm like, what? Really? Yeah. Why is that? So kind of like thought about it for a little bit and then went back into my executive's office and was like, hey, I I'm going to support this no matter what, but I need more than just, we're going to do it once a year. Like, what was the reason and the rationale behind it? So when I get questioned about it, I can better answer and better support the business, right? So giving that why and equipping people with it is, I think, a huge part of the change management and the approach, where it's not just like, hey, this is what we're doing and everyone has to like it. Like, it's okay to tell people this is why we're doing it. And, it may not always be the best thing. It may not always be, received as like, oh, I wish we could have got X, Y, or Z, but they're going to appreciate the honesty and the candor in which you approach it with. And they'll respect the conversation way more. And that I think is both individually as well as like broadly when you think about like corporate messages that go out to employees.
Yeah, and I think that's an effective way to rebuild that trust that probably has been lost. And I think a lot of times companies are making additional investments in compensation and benefits and total compensation strategies, but the ineffectiveness of communicating that out to the employees really diminishes the impact in most cases.
Yeah, Tarik, I want to go back because we were talking about having a goal in mind, and we talked about the intern program and specifically tied to DE&I. So from a diversity, equity, inclusion standpoint, I'm interested. You talked about scorecarding, DE&I efforts and creating reports. I guess the question is, how do you use DE&I data in today's world to really drive significant and meaningful action? What have you seen take place? And then maybe what would you suggest for people out there looking to, take that to the next level in their own organization?
Yeah, so I think it's to start, like, you got to cut the data a layer deeper, right? So not only where do we find great hires from, but where do our diverse hires come from, right? So where do we already have relationships with, probably from starting with current employees, right? Like, who went to what schools, who has relationships with certain fraternities or business associations, and how do we leverage that? And the biggest thing that I see kind of companies doing wrong in the internship space is, they'll talk about and they'll talk about numbers and metrics, but it almost seems like disingenuous sometimes, right? Of like, well, what's it going to be like when I get there, right? So who you send to the school is a huge piece to the puzzle. How they can talk about their own experience, right? And is there someone that looks like me above me in the organization? Or if I look up, like, is there this glass ceiling, right? These are all things that are going to go through an employee's mind when they get there and they start looking around. So if you're going to like go and do it, like, make sure you've got the right culture and the right environment to accept folks. And I think it's PwC that does a specialized training program for, I want to say it's first generation college students, or it might be people of college. I can't remember exactly which one, but it's a way to say, hey, there may be a gap that you're going to walk into, and we want to help you close it as fast as possible. So you're on the same playing field with these other folks at the end of the internship, right? So like, is there something you do to level playing field? That's a great question to ask yourself. Having a commitment to go and in the areas people are, right? Like that is another thing. Like, you can't just kind of sit at your table and expect to find the random sample of people that walk through you. Right? Like, if you're not getting out to classrooms and to organizations and building relationships, that's what it comes down to. Build that relationship. And if you might not get anyone for a year or 2 years or 3 years, but once they see you enough and they see that you're genuine, and hey, we are who we say we are. And then you start getting some interns that come back and can talk about their experience. And you start getting new hires that can come back and talk about what their internship experience was. Like, that storytelling really takes on a life of its own.
Just out of curiosity, since we live in a world of immediacy and our expectations have totally shifted, right? Now, if you get asked for a compensation benchmarking report that's expected to be on CFO's desk by Friday, right? Yeah. These expectations continue to get elevated because of our external experiences to the office, right? In business, like I order food, it's at my house in 5 minutes, right? So these expectations are constantly changing. And unfortunately or fortunately, workforce planning and strategic workforce planning is not always quick, right? We can't see that the investment is paying off. Is that why you feel like most people, when you just said 2 to 3 years, you might not see a return for 2 to 3 years? Key stakeholders are going to say, well, that's way too long. I need a return for my dollar way quicker than that. Right. What would you say so we can kind of, I guess, moderate expectations from senior leadership during these times of change, right? That these do take time and it does take a level of commitment before you scrap the plan and say, forget it, we're going back to what we were doing before.
Right. So I would say we're doing the right thing. And if you can tell me this isn't the right thing to do for a genuine reason, okay. Now, at some point, what you're doing has to turn into a tangible number and goal, right? But there's a way to be genuine and there's a way not to. And to put yourself in those places is the right thing to do. And to talk about yourselves honestly is the right thing to do. And so what we end up doing is we end up asking those leaders to go and to be that person that does that talk, right? So, hey, could we get an hour of your time at your alma mater to go talk to a group of students about Ally or about DT Midstream or about insert company here, right? And now you are giving them that experience. You're putting them in a space where they can see the talent. And by the way, they're a decision maker. So if they meet someone that they really like, we don't have to, wait for a certain period of time where we make this official. If you've got someone great that you met, that you had an interaction with, and you are a person of influence and a decision maker in the organization, hey, we can offer them an internship and we can offer them an opportunity. Maybe it's entry level, maybe it's an internship. But having a person of influence and a decision maker that it's not just, hey, we're going to send the 21, 22-year-old kid that just got out to go tell everyone how the first 6 months have been. That is key, right? So it's got to be a blend. You want to show someone that looks like you, but you also want to show that there's leadership involvement and commitment to what you're doing.
Tarik, earlier on, I think that this goes along the same lines of, making that right impression, making the experience, the intern experience, being what it could be. You mentioned earlier you had a mentor earlier in your career, and I think you said his name was Frank, which is fantastic.
Right, yeah.
But let's talk about the importance of that. So mentors, either formal or even informal. I remember at a previous organization, the general manager of the property said, who's mentoring you? And at the time, I'm like, that's a great question. I don't know. So, what is the importance, and what can maybe younger HR practitioners, as they're learning the trade, what can they do to find that individual or that one person that's going to help them kind of continue their own discovery and learning and growth?
Yeah, so I will say all my mentors have happened organically over the years. Yeah. And I know we've got like these mentor programs now, right? And hey, we want everyone to have a mentor. We want, these numbers to show our mentorship program.
Exactly.
I think forcing mentors and mentoring programs isn't always successful because You're not able to evaluate, hey, like who raised their hand to be a mentor? Well, how do I know you're going to be a good mentor? Yeah. Right. So one thing that I would always do was kind of look around at who was getting things done and who was able to kind of influence people around them. And if, imitation is the highest form of flattery, like you start to look at, hey, how are they going about their work? And if I have a question of, an upcoming project, I'm going to go take it to them to say, hey, like, I know you're going to be one of the loudest voices in the room. like, this is the way I'm thinking about talking about this. This is what we're trying to do. Like, what are your thoughts, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you bounce things off of people, and you're not just kind of blindsiding them with like, hey, it's presentation time, guys. Like, let's tell you about how all these changes we're going to make. Being able to get ahead of it and like get those opinions up front, like, you're building that mentor-mentee relationship from the beginning. And I feel like a lot of times as early talent, like, you come into an organization, you might be afraid to ask for help. And what I would tell you is asking for help is not a problem. As long as you can say, hey, I thought through A, B, C, I've tried 1, 2, 3, this is where I'm stuck, right? So no one will tell you no if you've shown the effort, right? So put the effort in, give them a reasonable and like rational thought process, and let them help you get over the hurdle or the hump or redirect you. And when you start doing that enough times, I ended up finding myself in those conversations with those same people that I went to over time, right? So now it's, hey, Tarik, like, this is what we're thinking about. Like, how are you looking at it, right? So you're almost putting yourself in those positions to learn from the folks that are doing it really well and to emulate the way that they do it. And, like, when it came time for it to be a formal program, I kind of looked at my friend Sarah, who was my mentor at Ally, and it was just like, you're already my mentor. Like, we're just going to make this official in the system, right? Because I'm constantly in your office, like, talking through strategy, talking through like, how is the business going to relate to this? And it's not so much about, hey, like, I'm an analyst or a senior analyst and I want to become a manager tomorrow. Like, how do I get there? Like, there's no substitution for good work, right? So the good work has to come first. And as long as you are expanding your network, like, through that good work, you're always going to kind of find yourself on the right side of things. So I've always been like that guy that like say like, hey, give me more, give me more, give me more. And one of like the fatal flaws is like you bite off too much, right? And so I think that's happened to everyone at some point. But that's like a learning experience, right? And that's the point where like you go to your mentor to say like, hey, I'm at this point, like, maybe I messed up. Like, how do I navigate this out, right? And hey, just be honest. Let them know the competing priority, know what's happening, right? And they help navigate you out of situations as much as navigate you situations. So that mentor-mentee relationship is huge. And, I think it starts with emulation. It's got to be organic and, build that network, right? Like, look for the folks that are and try to be like them.
Right. Love that. And I think you're I see mentor-mentee relationships as bi-directional, especially with the multi-generational workforce today. I think that's really how we retain a lot of that intellectual capital, like you mentioned, with the process. In the smaller businesses, I find just people have it more stored in their head instead of on paper. And if they got hit by a bus, a traumatic event like that, and then it all is lost. And that's really where I think the larger corporations have put it on paper, put it in policies and procedures, so it is repeatable, right, and sustainable as well. Albeit that they probably need to be reviewed every year or maybe every century would be a good start, just to make sure that they're in still alignment there. The last question that we always ask, since we're wrapping up, is, in your estimation, we're seeing like the skills gap, right? There's a massive skills gap growing today. There's a massive need within institutions to evaluate what is the current talent within our walls. We're hearing things about buying, renting, botting, and borrowing talent at this point. What, in your estimation, is the future of work, and what can businesses start to do and HR practitioners start to do today to be best prepared, in your estimation?
Yeah, and so I think it's twofold for me. I really feel like there's going to be an evolution within HR softwares. So what I mean by that is we go through talent planning, we go through one-on-ones with our employees, and we go through all these like different processes throughout the year. but they all feel somewhat disconnected in a lot of places, right? So in my mind, and I know there's some folks that are working on this like today, but it's going to be a platform where me as a manager, I can sit with my employee and I can map out their goals and their aspirations, and we can talk about where their skills are today, right? Like no one ever tracks skills and on paper, right? Like it's a thing you put on a resume, and you got to answer a question on it, right? Like, can you actually do a VLOOKUP that you say you could do on your resume, right? Or like tell me how to do it, right? There's so many different aspects to that. And when you get into how do we develop talent and those talent gaps, unless you are saying like, this is what I need and this is what we have, you're never able to identify the true gap ahead of time. Otherwise it's, hey, like there's a need that happened, but now we're reactive instead of proactive. So I really feel like there's going to be some sort of software solution that comes out where you are tying in the conversations between managers and employees that happen. And then a leader can kind of go down and look in there to say, okay, well, we've taken inventory of the talent that we have, the skill sets that we have. And so now you layer in the performance piece, right? You can start to see and evaluate the quality of those skills. And now you start to get into talent planning, right? So what happens if this person leaves? Like, who would be next person up? Well, if we say they have certain experiences, I think one thing that I've always been really curious about is if we create a talent pipeline and we create a succession plan and somebody leaves, how often do we use that succession plan versus like, oh no, we need something different, right? Like, so that's, I think, a fun piece of HR where we've got to kind of get our arms wrapped around it and really be honest with ourselves. Is this a true replacement, or are we going to go outside? And the advantage of staying internal is, hey, you get to promote from within, you create opportunities from within, it opens up that funnel. And the advantage of going outside is, maybe you're bringing in people with new and different perspectives, right? And so it's a balance, and you got to be aware of what you need and when you need it. But I really feel like there's going to be some software solutions that come out to really help us have that conversation and to make it cohesive from beginning to end, right? That entire life cycle of an employee kind of captured in one area. And if I'm an employee, I can go in and update it. If I'm a manager, I can go in and update it. If I'm a leader, I can view it and cut it 1,000 different ways. I really feel like that's going to be kind of the future of HR.
Cool. I love that. And I think obviously we see the opportunity, the business opportunity, and so does the business community in many of the areas that you mentioned there. So I loved what you said, but we all need to understand what we need and when we need it most. And the leveraging the data and the insights that you shared earlier, I think, is a great way to get there. And being honest with ourselves. I love that point that you made multiple times throughout the episode, Tarik. So thank you for that. I think there's a lot of different things, but I know compensation cannot be the only lever that we're pulling because pretty soon we're going to find ourselves in the red very quickly. We're paying our director of first impressions about $1 million. So there's got to be more intentions and meaningful intentions behind workforce planning and strategy. Otherwise, I fear for businesses if compensation and monetary is the only thing. So, but thank you so much for today's interview. You shared a lot of great insights. I think there's a lot of great tangible takeaways for our audience, and just thank you for the work that you're doing and the mentorship that you're providing out in the community as well for HR practitioners and professionals.
Awesome.
Hey guys, I appreciate the opportunity, and as always, go blue.
Take it easy, Tarik. Thanks so much.
Yep.
Take care, guys.